The stars stretched like silent witnesses across the abyss, vast and indifferent to the ambitions of those who dared claim dominion over them. Among them, nestled in the frontier of human expansion, the world of Azoth 7 pulsed with quiet potential. The ruins stood tall beneath twin moons, their ancient stonework kissed by the glow of a dying sun. Silent sentinels of an empire long forgotten, they whispered of a time when gods walked among mortals. At least, that was the assumption. Aboard the UNSS Dauntless, Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge, his gaze locked onto the projection of the latest findings. The ruins bore intricate carvings, elegant, mathematical, almost surgical in their precision. The symbols spoke of power, dominion, and something else. Something unnerving. Dr. Anaya Khatri, humanity's foremost expert in xenolinguistics, scrolled through the patterns with furrowed brows. "These aren't just depictions of past rulers," she murmured half to herself. "They're prophecies, declarations of an empire that will never fall." Voss exhaled sharply, fingers drumming against the reinforced metal of his console. He had spent years navigating the treacherous waters of first contact, negotiating with species who saw humans as either prey, partners, or pests. But this was different. A warning wrapped in arrogance, carved into stone that predated human spaceflight by eons. A signal pulsed through the ship's systems, a deep, resonant chime that overrode all others, not the subtle ping of incoming transmissions, nor the urgent scream of an emergency alert. This was something else, something ancient. The voice that followed was not transmitted in sound but in presence, a layered cascade of thought pressing against their minds with cold certainty. Kneel. Every console flickered, every screen filled with symbols that twisted and reshaped themselves into human language. The message burned with quiet authority, resonating deep in the marrow of every soul aboard. "The Aetari have returned. You will kneel before your gods." The silence that followed was absolute. Then the stars moved. A fleet, golden-hulled and immense, materialized from the void. Not in the sluggish emergence of ships dropping from FTL, nor the sleek shimmer of phase drives engaging. No, they simply were, as if the universe itself had always intended their presence, or as if they had simply rewritten reality to accommodate their arrival. Inside the war room, the tension was thick enough to suffocate. Major Rylan O'Shea, a veteran of first contact skirmishes, leaned against the table, arms crossed, eyes narrow with the cold scrutiny of a soldier sizing up an enemy before the first shot was fired. "They call themselves gods." His voice carried the weight of disbelief and the simmering embers of something darker. "How original." Dr. Khatri barely glanced up, engrossed in the cryptic symbols still running across the displays. "They aren't just claiming divinity as a power play. They believe it." Voss stared at the projection, the largest ship among them gleaming like a monument carved from starlight. The Aetari expected submission. Their arrogance was woven into the fabric of their arrival, in the way their vessels hovered without acknowledging the orbital protocols of lesser beings. "Humanity doesn't kneel," Voss said finally, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The response from the Aetari came almost instantly. "Then humanity will burn." From the observation deck, the first strike was visible before the sensors registered it. A moon, one of Azoth 7's distant sentinels, ceased to exist. Not shattered, not fractured, not even vaporized. It was as though something had reached into the very fabric of its being and erased it from history. The aftershock rippled across the fleet's systems. Alarms flared. Voss clenched the railing, his knuckles white. This was not an enemy flexing its firepower. This was an execution, a demonstration of force so absolute it defied retaliation. O'Shea's hands curled into fists. "They want submission, not war." "But war is what they'll get," Voss murmured. The Aetari had called themselves gods. They had declared their dominion over reality itself, but they had yet to learn the first rule of humanity. Godhood is not given. It is earned. The void trembled with power, the golden-hulled Aetari vessels looming in orbit like celestial arbiters, their presence a cosmic verdict upon those who defied them. The aftershock of the moon's erasure still rippled through the fabric of space, a silent declaration that they were beyond the petty wars of mortals. They were absolute. Aboard the UNSS Dauntless, the silence was not one of fear, but calculation. Humanity did not kneel. That much was certain. But the question remained, how does one fight gods? Captain Elias Voss exhaled slowly, his mind processing possibilities at a breakneck pace. The bridge was alive with controlled chaos. Sensor operators scrambled to make sense of the energy readings. Analysts whispered theories that bordered on the absurd, and yet one undeniable truth hung in the air like an executioner's axe. Humanity was outmatched. Dr. Anaya Khatri's voice cut through the tension. We can't assume their technology is limitless. Her fingers danced over the interface, translating the ancient glyphs they had discovered on Azoth 7. They want obedience because they need it. A true god doesn't ask to be worshipped. It is simply known. Major Rylan O'Shea let out a low, humorless chuckle. You're saying they're faking it? His tone carried no disbelief, only the quiet, deadly amusement of a soldier who had spent his life exposing false gods on the battlefield. Hell of a bluff. Voss's eyes remained locked onto the tactical display. Then we need to call it. The Aetari fleet did not move. It hovered, its immense presence exerting unseen pressure upon every sensor, every screen, every instinct honed by the natural laws of war. They did not fire. They did not negotiate. They simply waited. A voice. No, a presence, pressed against their minds again, wrapping around thought itself like a vice. Kneel, and no eternity. Resist and be unmade. O'Shea clenched his jaw. I'd rather kneel on a bed of knives. Voss spoke without hesitation. Send a response. The transmission pulsed outward, encoded in the blunt, unyielding efficiency of human language, a simple message stripped of reverence, devoid of submission. No, the Aetari answered with fire. The first strike came with the inevitability of a supernova, a lance of golden energy that speared toward the UNSS Dauntless at incomprehensible speed. It should have obliterated them, but it didn't. The ship lurched, as O'Shea's preemptive evasive maneuvers engaged, thrusters firing at maximum burn. The beam grazed the hull, sending cascades of energy rippling across the shield matrix, but the Dauntless held firm. Warning klaxons screamed through the corridors. Voss barely registered the damage reports as they scrolled across his screen. His focus was locked onto one critical anomaly. The beam hadn't bypassed their shields. It hadn't erased them like it had the moon. O'Shea saw it too. They don't have infinite power, he growled, a sharp grin cutting across his face. That shot was meant to scare us. They don't just erase everything they touch. Dr. Khatri's mind raced. Because they can't, she whispered, the realization clicking into place like a puzzle finding its missing piece. It's not magic. It's technology. And technology has limits. Voss turned toward his tactical officers. Get me a full breakdown of their energy signatures. I want to know how much power that attack drained and how long it takes for them to fire another. Another strike lashed out from the Aetari warships, but this time the Dauntless was ready. Countermeasures flared to life, displacing the ship through an intricate web of gravimetric pulses. The beam missed by a fraction of a second, carving a molten scar across the planet's atmosphere instead. The Aetari hesitated. Voss smirked. So much for gods. Aboard the Aetari flagship, the celestial chamber pulsed with incandescent fury. The being known as Solmara the Eternal, first voice of the Celestial Council, tilted her head in quiet contemplation. They resist. One of her lesser, kin murmured, voice like rippling silk over a blade. Solmara's luminous form flickered, energy coiling around her like a living storm. Then they are unworthy. She reached outward, her consciousness merging with the vast network of the Aetari's war machines. The Dauntless was an insect before the storm, a flickering candle before the hurricane of divinity. And yet, it had survived. That was unacceptable. "We will erase them," another voice whispered, eager, zealous. Solmara hesitated. The council had commanded dominance, not destruction. Their power was unquestioned until now. The humans had not crumbled beneath their will. They had answered with defiance. How strange. How fascinating. Her form shimmered with curiosity. Perhaps humanity was worth something more than mere subjugation. For the first time in 1,000 cycles, she felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. Back aboard the Dauntless, Voss stood before the holographic projection of the battlefield. The fleet of the so-called gods loomed, their golden hulls untouched, their weapons humming with barely restrained fury. But they weren't attacking. Not yet. Dr. Khatri exhaled. They expected us to kneel. They don't know what to do when we don't. O'Shea grinned, cracking his knuckles. Guess it's time we show 'em how humans handle false gods. Voss allowed himself a small smile, cold and determined. Send a new message. The comm officer nodded. What should it say? Voss turned toward the vast waiting fleet, his voice carrying the weight of every war humanity had ever won against impossible odds. Come and find out. The cosmos felt heavier now, the Aetari's golden fleet looming as if it could suffocate the void itself. Though their weapons rested, the tension was palpable, a silent standoff between an empire that claimed godhood and a species that refused to bow. Humanity's ingenuity had bought them time, but the question remained. How long could they stand against beings who bent the laws of reality to their will? In the depths of the UNSS Dauntless, Dr. Anaya Khatri hunched over her workstation, her focus razor-sharp. The symbols from Azoth 7 flashed across the screen, the ancient inscriptions a labyrinth of cryptic meaning. Each line hinted at power, arrogance, and secrets buried beneath millennia of hubris. Her breakthrough came in a whisper, an insight so delicate it felt like catching the edge of a dream before it slipped away. It's not divine, she murmured. It's stolen. The revelation unfurled rapidly, her hands moving faster than her mind could process. The Aetari's power wasn't inherent. It had roots in technology they did not create. The ruins on Azoth 7, the symbols they bore, these weren't just monuments to the Aetari. They were relics of a civilization that predated even them. Anaya's heart raced as she opened a channel to Captain Voss. I need you to see this. The Aetari didn't invent their technology, they inherited it. The line crackled. Voss's voice, steady but tinged with urgency. Are you saying their claim to godhood is a lie? Not entirely. Anaya paused, her mind connecting pieces of a puzzle too vast for comfort. They've mastered the tools they found, but they don't understand them fully. That's why they rely on fear and obedience. If someone exposes their weakness, they lose their dominion. Voss finished, his tone sharpening. Good work, Doctor. Let's see if we can shake their faith. Meanwhile, in the ship's armory, Major Rylan O'Shea prepared his Marines. Humanity's survival was rarely decided in negotiation. Chambers, it was forged in blood and fire. The Dauntless carried no weapon that could match the Aetari's overwhelming force, but O'Shea knew that wars weren't won by raw power alone. Listen up, he barked, his voice cutting through the hum of the room. The Aetari think they've got the upper hand because they've never fought anyone like us. They don't know what we're capable of. The Marines nodded, their faces hard with determination. Each one knew the stakes. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to prove that humanity couldn't be cowed, not by gods, not by anyone. O'Shea's lips curled into a grim smile. They want to fight? Let's show them what happens when you corner a Terran. The Atari's silence was broken by the emergence of a new figure, a towering avatar of light and energy, its form shimmering like a mirage. Solmara the Eternal, emissary of the Celestial Council, stepped forward onto the bridge of the Dauntless. She was both alien and awe-inspiring, her presence bending the air around her, as if reality itself struggled to accommodate her existence. Her voice echoed in their minds, a resonance that bypassed sound entirely. You resist not out of courage, but ignorance. We offer you salvation, yet you choose annihilation. Captain Voss faced her without flinching, his expression carved from stone. Salvation doesn't come with a leash. Solmara's luminous gaze flickered, her tone sharpening. You misunderstand. There is no choice. You will kneel, or you will cease to exist. Then you leave us no choice, Voss said evenly. For a moment there was silence, a pause pregnant with the weight of 1,000 decisions. Then the Dauntless opened fire. The battle erupted in a storm of chaos and ingenuity. Humanity's weapons, primitive by comparison, struck with precision and ferocity. The Aetari fleet, unaccustomed to facing resistance, hesitated. Their shields flared, their ships maneuvered, but cracks began to show. It was not the overwhelming firepower of humanity's fleet that disrupted the Aetari's dominion, but their sheer unpredictability. Guerrilla tactics, AI-driven countermeasures, and improvised weaponry turned the battlefield into a proving ground for human adaptability. And in the midst of the chaos, Voss's gamble paid off. A small strike team, led by O'Shea, infiltrated an Aetari cruiser. Their mission, to gather intelligence on the Aetari systems and exploit any weaknesses. Inside, the ship was a cathedral of light and geometry, its corridors pulsating with alien energy. The Marines moved with precision, their HUDs flickering as they adjusted to the shifting architecture. This is insane, one of the Marines muttered. Welcome to the Terran Marines, O'Shea replied, his tone darkly amused. Insane is our specialty. Their objective lay in the heart of the ship, a core that pulsed with energy unlike anything human science could explain. But as they approached, something unexpected happened. The energy shifted, forming into a humanoid figure. A guardian. Of light, ancient and unyielding. O'Shea raised his weapon, but the guardian spoke first. You are intruders. You do not belong here. Neither do your gods, O'Shea shot back, his finger on the trigger. The guardian hesitated. Its form flickered, as if caught between two states of existence. They are not gods, it said finally, its voice tinged with something almost like regret. Before O'Shea could respond, the room erupted into chaos. The Aetari systems detected their presence, alarms blaring as security drones swarmed toward them. The Marines fought with grim determination, but it was clear they wouldn't last long. O'Shea glanced at the core, its energy swirling with barely contained power. He made a snap decision. Plant the charges, we're blowing this thing to hell. As the Marines fought their way back to the extraction point, the Aetari fleet began to falter. The destruction of one cruiser sent ripples through their ranks, a reminder that even gods could bleed. Back aboard the Dauntless, Dr. Khatri's work bore fruit. The symbols from Azoth 7 revealed a critical weakness in the Aetari's energy matrix, a flaw in their stolen technology. Captain, she said, her voice urgent. If we can overload their systems, we might be able to take down their flagship. Voss nodded, his expression grim. Do it. The Dauntless moved into position, its crew working with relentless precision. The ship's weapons fired a concentrated burst, targeting the flaw in the Aetari's systems. The flagship's shields flickered, then failed. For the first time, the Aetari hesitated. Their invincibility had been challenged, their godhood shattered. And in that hesitation, humanity saw hope. Voss's voice carried across the comms, firm and unyielding. This isn't over, not by a long shot. The Aetari now faced a truth they had never considered. Humanity would not kneel, and gods who could bleed were no gods at all. The Aetari's once pristine formation was now a battlefield of flickering shields and fractured arrogance. The UNSS Dauntless led the charge, weaving through the gaps in their once impenetrable defenses, human ingenuity carving wounds into the celestial behemoths that had never known defiance. Inside the Aetari flagship, chaos reigned. The once serene corridors designed for beings who had never expected violence aboard their sacred vessels now echoed with the sounds of battle. Explosions sent ripples through the gilded architecture, flickering energy fields struggling to contain the damage. Major, Rylan O'Shea and his Marines pushed forward, their every step a defiance against divinity itself. They fought with the relentless efficiency of those who had spent their lives in the shadow of extinction, turning the Aetari's own arrogance against them. "How's that for a god?" one Marine snarled, tossing a grenade down a corridor lined with levitating figures of light. The explosion sent shards of golden energy cascading through the air like shattered illusions. The Aetari faltered. For the first time in thousands of years, they knew fear. In the heart of the flagship, Captain Elias Voss and Dr. Anaya Khatri stood in front of the central control nexus, a towering pillar of light and shifting symbols. It was the mind of the Aetari's fleet, a pulsating conduit of power that connected every warship, every system, every mind in perfect unison. And it was flawed. Anaya's voice was tense but steady. Their entire fleet operates on a neural lattice system, one consciousness, guiding all. If we can disrupt it, Voss didn't hesitate. Then we take down their entire empire in one move. But they weren't alone. Solmara the Eternal stepped forward, her radiant form dimming slightly, her very presence rippling with something new. Doubt. "You misunderstand," she said, her voice still carrying the weight of ages, but now with an edge of something almost human. "We are not oppressors. We bring order. We end suffering." Voss narrowed his eyes. "You erase free will. Choice leads to chaos. Chaos leads to destruction. We have seen it across countless cycles. And yet here, we are," Voss countered. "Your so-called perfection failed to predict this. Why?" Solmara hesitated. For the first time, the divine emissary of the Celestial Council had no answer. Anaya stepped closer. "You're afraid, aren't you?" Her voice wasn't mocking, it was understanding. "You've always believed your power was absolute, that it made you gods. But now you see the cracks." Solmara's form flickered, her light dimming further. "We are necessary," she murmured, though the certainty in her tone was fading. Voss pressed forward. "If you were truly gods, we wouldn't be standing here. Your ships wouldn't be burning, your warriors wouldn't be falling. You wouldn't be doubting yourself." For a moment, the war around them faded into the background. There was only the quiet hum of the control nexus, the pulsing light of an empire on the brink. Then Solmara lowered her head. "You cannot stop the council," she whispered. "They will not allow weakness." Voss nodded. "Then help us end them." The Celestial Council had not expected resistance. From their citadel ship they watched as their forces wavered. The humans had not been erased. The battle was not won in an instant. They had underestimated human defiance. But the Council did not entertain failure. Deep within their core systems they activated the final edict, a weapon not of fire and destruction but of memory and erasure. Across the battlefield, Aetari ships vanished. Not destroyed, not retreating. Simply gone. Solmara gasped, horror flashing across her usually serene face. "They're deleting the battlefield," she whispered. "They would rather erase our entire existence than allow weakness to spread." Anaya's blood ran cold. "If they activate that fully, every trace of this war, of humanity, of resistance will be erased," Solmara finished. Voss's jaw clenched. No, not after everything they had fought for. O'Shea's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, we've set charges on their power core. Say the word, and we bring down their whole damn house of gods." Voss looked at Solmara. "Are you with us?" She hesitated for only a moment. Then, for the first time in her existence, she chose. She reached out, her form surging with energy, and shattered the final edict's control hub. The Celestial Council's ship convulsed. Their voices, once omnipresent, screamed through the network as their control collapsed. The godhood they had wielded so effortlessly was torn from them in an instant. And in that instant, O'Shea's charges detonated. The flagship imploded, the Aetari fleet breaking apart as their unity shattered. The gods were undone, In the aftermath, silence fell over the battlefield. Humanity had not just survived. They had rewritten the heavens. The Aetari who remained were no longer deities, but beings stripped of their illusion of immortality. Some fled into the depths of space. Others knelt, not in worship, but in surrender. Solmara stood among them, her form no longer blinding, no longer divine, just another soul adrift in the void. Voss watched the remnants of the Empire scatter and exhaled. "We did it," Anaya murmured. O'Shea let out a breath, shaking his head with a wry grin. "We just made a whole lot of powerful enemies." Voss turned his gaze to the dark beyond. The Aetari were only the beginning. If they had stolen their power, then what had they stolen it from? And what if that something was still out there? For now, the war was over. But humanity's battle for the stars had only just begun. The battlefield was quiet now. The great golden fleet of the Aetari, once shining monuments to their supposed divinity, drifted as fractured remnants among the stars. Some vessels had fled, their captains unwilling to face mortality. Others remained in a state of eerie silence, their systems failing, their crews lost in the depths of disbelief. The gods had fallen. Aboard the UNSS Dauntless, Captain Elias Voss stood at the bridge watching the debris field stretch across the void. Victory had come at a cost. Hull fractures ran along the ship's frame, casualties were still being counted, and the damage to human vessels had been severe. And yet, they had won. Humanity had stood against gods and proved them false. In the medical bay, Dr. Anaya Khatri sat beside a restrained figure, Solmara the Eternal, now simply Solmara. No longer a divine emissary, no longer an untouchable being of light. She looked almost small. She studied her hands, now corporeal, no longer an ethereal projection of superiority. "This is what it means to be mortal," she murmured. Anaya regarded her carefully. "Is that regret I hear?" Solmara exhaled. An involuntary act, her new form requiring breath. It startled her. She had never had to breathe before, never had to think of such things. "I do not know," she admitted. "I spent eons believing in our supremacy, that our will was the guiding force of all things. Now, I do not even know what I am." "Welcome to being human," Anaya said, not unkindly. Solmara's glowing eyes dimmed. "And what happens now?" Anaya's expression softened. "That depends on you." Major Rylan O'Shea stood on the hangar deck, overseeing the surrendered Aetari soldiers. Those who remained had discarded their ceremonial armor, their eyes haunted. They had once spoken in absolutes, but now their voices were quiet, uncertain. One of them, an officer, stepped forward hesitantly. What do we do now?" O'Shea regarded the alien carefully. "That's up to you," he said. "You can fight, you can run, or you can learn what it means to live without pretending you're a god." The officer lowered his gaze, as if the weight of that choice was too much to bear. For the first time, the Aetari were no longer rulers, no longer infallible. They were just another species among many, forced to find their own way. Back on the bridge, Voss took a long breath as he faced the aftermath. A transmission was coming in, the United Nations Stellar Command. They had witnessed the battle. Word had already spread. "Captain Voss," the Admiral's voice crackled through the comm. "You've just changed the course of history." Voss leaned back in his chair, exhausted but resolute. "We held the line, sir. But something tells me this isn't over." The Admiral hesitated. "No, it isn't. A secondary report came in. A deep space signal. Faint, but there. Something old. Something watching." The Aetari had stolen their power. But from what? And if that power had an original owner, what would happen when it came looking for what was stolen? Voss exhaled, already knowing what this meant. Humanity had proven it would not kneel. But now, something else was coming, and humanity would have to prove itself all over again. The embers of battle had faded, but the scars remained. The once glorious Aetari fleet lay in ruins, its survivors scattered across the stars, their empire shattered beyond recognition. No longer gods, no longer rulers, just another species adrift in the cosmic tide, struggling to redefine themselves in a universe that no longer feared them. On board the UNSS Dauntless, the weight of victory hung heavy. The crew moved with weary determination, tending to repairs, mourning the fallen, and preparing for whatever came next. Because something always came next. In her private quarters, Dr. Anaya Khatri studied the translated inscriptions from Azoth 7, scrolling through the ancient symbols with a growing sense of unease. What had once been mere speculation had solidified into something far more ominous. The Aetari had not created their power. They had taken it. The records spoke of a force greater than them, something ancient beyond comprehension. The ruins weren't monuments to the Atari's reign. They were warnings. Anaya's heart pounded as she pieced it together. The Aetari hadn't simply stolen their technology. They had hidden from what they stole it from. And now, with their empire fractured, that protection was gone. On the bridge, Captain Elias Voss stared at the latest intelligence reports. A faint signal had been detected on the edges of explored space, one that bore no human or Aetari signature. It pulsed with slow, deliberate intervals, as if waiting for a response. A cold dread settled in his chest. "Admiral," he said over the secured channel, "we have an anomaly." The voice on the other end was grim. "We see it too, Captain, and we don't think it's random." Voss's jaw tightened. "It's a response." The words settled like lead in the room. For the first time since humanity had defied the Aetari, Voss felt something unexpected. Not fear, not hesitation, but certainty. The gods had fallen, but something older had been listening. And now, it was waking up.